Good afternoon. Today we're going to talk about solving one-step equations. Before we get into our practice, I want to review the steps. Step 1 is to isolate the variable. When you isolate the variable, you're going to first want to circle the variable term. Now remember, the variable term is the term that has the variable in it. Then you're going to want to remove the constant term by adding its opposite to both sides of the equal sign. Finally, you're just going to simplify. Now step 2 is to make the coefficient equal to 1. In this case, you're going to underline the variable, just the variable itself. Make your coefficient equal to 1 by doing the inverse operation to both sides of the equation of the number that is by the variable. And then we're going to simplify. Now in one-step equations, we're going to either do step 1 or we're going to do step 2. That's why it's referred to as a one-step equation. We only have to do one of these. So let's look at some examples. Let's first look at x plus 2 equals 10. In this case, I want to circle the variable term, which would just be my x, and now I want to remove the constant term that is by it, which would be plus 2. Now, to remove the plus 2, it says to add its opposite. So what's the opposite of a plus 2? If you remember correctly, it should just be a negative 2. So I'm going to add negative 2 to both sides of the equation, and then I'm going to get x equals 8. Because what will happen is that negative 2 and 2 will then cancel, or add rather, to 0. So this becomes x equals 8 when I simplify the left side and the right side. And you're done with that. Let's try a different one. X minus 3 equals 15. So in this case, I'm going to first circle my variable term, which is just the x by itself. And then I'm going to remove the minus 3, the constant term, by adding its opposite. So what's the opposite of a minus 3? Hopefully you're all going to tell me plus 3. So I'm going to do plus 3 on both sides. Negative 3 plus 3 will add to 0. And then when I simplify the left-hand side, I'm going to get x. And 15 plus 3 is 18. And that would be my answer. All right. In step 2, make the coefficient equal 1. The one-step equations will be involving multiplication and division. So let's look at some problems like that. So in that case, let's just go ahead and say, what happens if I have 4x equals 12? In this case, there's only one term, 4x. So our variable term is already by itself. So what I'm going to do now is underline the variable, just the variable, so I can look at what number is next to it. Right now the coefficient is 4. Well, I need that 4 to be equal to a 1. So what can I do to 4 to make it equal 1? Well, if I'm multiplying by 4, the next thing I should do is probably divide by 4. So in this case, I'm going to divide both sides by 4. If I divide both sides by 4, then what will happen is the 4 divided by 4 will simplify to 1, because anything divided by itself is 1. And when I simplify this expression, I will get x equals 3. Now, if I have an equation that is x divided by 3 equals 5, again, if I'm looking for the variable term, x divided by 3 is the variable term, and it's already by itself. So I'm not going to isolate the variable. Instead, I need to make the coefficient just 1. Right now, it looks like a divided by 3. Some of you might recognize that that's the same as saying 1/3 x. There's a lot of different ways to think about it. But if I want to undo a divide by 3, the inverse operation for division would be multiplication. So I would have to multiply both sides by 3. When I did that, this 3 and this divide by 3 would be paired together, and 3 divided by 3 is the number 1. So that when I simplify this expression, I would get x equals 5 times 3, which is 15. So that, in a nutshell, is how you would do a one-step equation. So the step will either be isolate the variable if you have a variable added or subtracted with a number, or make the coefficient equal to 1 if you have a number multiplied or divided with the variable. Okay, let's just do a couple of examples together today. We're just going to do one after another. The first one we're going to do is 26 equals 8 plus v. Okay, so first thing I do is I recognize that I have a variable term and I have a constant number 8. So I'm going to isolate the variable by adding its opposite. So I'm going to add a negative 8 to both sides. And when I simplify, this negative 8 and 8 will add to 0. And I'll do 26 minus 8. And if we take a moment, I think we should get 18. So that sounds right. And then equals v. Now, after you do a problem, you should always check your work to see if you did it correctly. So let's see what we can do to check. Now to check, you would start with your original equation, which was 26 equals 8 plus v. But what you would do is where the v was, you would erase that, and you would put in the answer that you got. In this case, 18. Then you would do your arithmetic. 8 plus 18 is 26. 26 equals 26, so left-hand side equals right-hand side. That checks out. I know that that was my answer. So 18 must have equaled v. All right, let's look at number 2. Number 2 is going to be 3 plus p equals 8. So again, find the variable term. In this case, it's p, which means I need to get rid of a plus 3. How do I get rid of a plus 3? I do add its opposite, so negative 3 and negative 3. 3 plus a negative 3 adds to 0. I'm going to simplify, so 0 plus p is p. 8 minus 3 is 5. So I think my answer is 5. Let's check. 3 plus 5 equals 8. 8 equals 8. That checks out. So p equals 5 is my answer. Okay, and it's always a variation on a theme. Let's try one more. This case, let's do v minus 15 equals negative 27. First thing we do is we look for our variable. In this case, we have a variable term. We want to get rid of the minus 15. I always add its opposite. So the opposite of a minus 15 would be a plus 15. And I would have to do that on both sides to keep my equation balanced. Negative 15 plus 15 will add to 0. I get v minus 0, which is just v, equals, and then when I add a negative 27 into 15, they have unlike values, or excuse me, unlike signs. So I know I'm going to subtract and keep the sign with a higher absolute value, in this case, than negative 27. So I'm going to get a negative 12. Now, this is the part where you should always remember to check. So I'm going to go and put negative 12 minus 15 equals negative 27. When I add these together, I get negative 27 equals negative 27. That checks out. I can feel comfortable that that is my answer. Guys feeling okay? All right. This is what we do when we are trying to isolate the variable term. So that means there's something added or subtracted to the variable term, and we're always going to add its opposite on both sides to get rid of it. Okay, let's change our goal and start thinking about what happens if my equation has multiply or divide in it. So let's look at our next set of examples. Let's start with number 1. And we're going to have negative 104 equals 8x. Well, in this case, the variable term 8x is all by itself. So really, I'm not trying to isolate the variable. I'm trying to make its coefficient, which is currently 8, equal to 1. So I'm going to underline x, see what's happening with the variable x. In this case, it is being multiplied by 8. So if being multiplied by 8, I should then do the inverse of multiply by 8, which is divide by 8 on both sides. And if I divide by 8 on both sides, what happens? 8 divided by 8 will equal 1. And 1 times x is going to be x. 104 divided by 8 will be a negative 104 divided by 8 would be a negative, let's see, 113. Well, I'm not quite sure about that, so I should check my work. Negative 104 equals 8 times negative 13. Now, if I don't know that off the top of my head, I might have to do that multiplication out longhand. 8 times 3 is 24, carry my 2, 8, 9, 10. Negative and positive is a negative, so this is negative 104. And yes, that looks correct to me. All right, let's try number 2. Number 2 is going to be negative 6 equals b over 18, or b divided by 18. Again, if you look at it, my variable term is already isolated. I have a b, but it's not just one b. It's not a coefficient of 1. So I need to undo by using multiply or divide. So how do I undo divide by 18? Hopefully you thought, let's multiply by 18. But if I do it to one side, I must do it to the other. The 18 divided by 18, these are going to be grouped together, and they're going to simplify to 1. 1 times b is simply b. So then I'm going to do 18 times negative 6. Now I can't do that in my head, so I'm going to do that over here to the side. 6 times 8 is 48, carry over my 4, 6 and 4 is 10, and I got a negative 108 as my answer. Now again, I can't just assume that's correct, so I'm going to do negative 6 equals negative 108, that's where the b was, divided by 18. So hopefully if I do my division, I will get the same negative 6. Is that making a little bit more sense? Yes? Fantastic. Let's do one more like this. Alrighty, let's try negative 16. Let's try negative 17x equals negative 204. Okay. Well, again, this is not a variable term, add or subtract something. It is just the variable term. So looking at it, I know I want x to have a coefficient of 1. So right now it has a coefficient of negative 17. So negative 17 times x. How do I undo negative 17 times x? Well, we would use the inverse operation. So we would then go, okay, we should divide both sides by negative 17. Negative 17 divided by negative 17 is a positive 1. So this will go to 1. 1 times x is x. 2 negatives make a positive. I'm going to have to do some arithmetic over here. So 204 divided by 17. It's 1 time is 17. That's going to come down as a 34. 2 times 17 is 34. So this will become a positive 12. And again, I just don't assume that's correct. Negative 17 times 12 equals negative 204. Let's do some multiplication again. Times 12. I'm going to do 14, carry 1. 34, 170. We're going to add those up. 4, 0, 2, and it's going to be negative times a positive, so a negative. So negative 204 equals negative 204. Please note how I'm writing my check is how you should also be writing your check. Your check should always be the original equation, and then where the variable is, put parentheses and what you think the answer should be. Then check your arithmetic to make sure the left-hand side equals the right-hand side. All right, I'm going to stop here, and I'll see you next time.